Hey everyone, Amtrak Guy 365 here, and today on this remade edition of Engines of Amtrak, I'll be rediscussing the Budd Metroliner. This is a remake of the original episode you can still watch as of the making of this video. During the mid-1960s, passenger rail in the United States was really starting to fall apart. Equipment and infrastructure was old, and highways and airlines were taking over. Meanwhile, in Europe and Asia, however, innovations in rail technology were being undertaken. Most notably was Japan's Shinkansen high-speed bullet train racing up to 130 miles per hour. Back in the US, the High-Speed Ground Transportation Act of 1965 was pending in the government. It was set to kickstart the growth of high-speed rail in the US after seeing what Japan had accomplished. Representatives from the Pennsylvania Railroad, United States Department of Transportation, and a private consulting firm began discussing specifications for a high-speed electric multiple unit train set, or EMU. But disagreements were commonplace during its development. The PRR wanted cab cars on both ends for flexible operations, while US DOT wanted 4-car sets. 2-car sets with cabs on each end was chosen as a compromise. Soon after, though, the High-Speed Ground Transportation Act was signed into law on September 30th, 1965, and then President Lyndon Johnson pushed the project with an aggressive schedule. In order to test the Northeast Corridor's feasibility for high-speed rail, 4 modified Budd Silverliners numbered T1 to T4 were ordered to reach speeds of 150 miles per hour. Initial tests fell short of this until a semi-streamlined slab was placed on the front end, allowing the set to top out at 156 miles per hour. On May 6, 1966, the High-Speed Ground Transportation Project ordered 50 new EMU cars to be built by the Budd Company. The order was delivered in September 1967, with the new trains being named Metroliners. It consisted of 20 coach cars with Westinghouse propulsion systems, and 20 snack bar coaches, and 10 parlor cars with General Electric propulsion systems. As for technical specifications, the Metroliners were rated for a top speed of 150 miles per hour. The coaches produced 1,200 horsepower, while the snack and parlor cars produced 1,020 horsepower. They weighed in at 166,000 pounds. Each car came in at a length of 85 feet, a width of 10 feet 6 inches, and a height of 14 feet 10 inches. The Metroliners came equipped with shrill-sounding Leslie horns. Here's a few samples. A planned service start date was set for October 1967, but multiple issues with the control and propulsion system at 70 miles per hour pushed the date back to January 1968. In November of 1967, the Pennsylvania Railroad began testing its first 2 cars on their main line. The cars reached 125 miles per hour, but topped out at 164 miles per hour near Princeton Junction in New Jersey during another test. Though that same test proved the cars wouldn't be able to operate anywhere near that speed in revenue service. In December, tests where the Metroliners passed by the early 1900s built MP54 EMUs revealed the Metroliners would rip out the windows on the MP54 due to a sudden pressure drop. Given these issues, revenue service would not begin in January 1968 as planned. On February 1st that year, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to create Penn Central, so any Metroliners going forward were delivered with Penn Central markings, but retained the PRR pinstriping. The first GE-powered Metroliners arrived for testing in March, with their pantographs proving more successful. The Westinghouse-powered ones bounced on the old overhead wires and often drew out high currents because of improperly designed transformers. Other issues with electric arcing on longer combined train sets further delayed entering service. After electrical substation modifications and a legal settlement between Penn Central and the Budd Company, Penn Central announced Metroliner service to begin on January 16, 1969. A VIP train from Washington, D.C. to New York City operated on January 15th, with the first revenue train finally running the next day as a 6-car set as a single round trip in the afternoon. However, problems like the sets sucking out the MP54's windows still occurred. An 8-car set was trialed on February 5th, but it caused several circuit breaker trips and catenary outages. Metroliner service slowly increased, but the Federal Railroad Administration had limited the sets to no more than 110 miles per hour. But even with this setback, they still ranked in as North America's fastest train at the time. However, though, this was still a fair bit short of beating out Japan's Shinkansen operating speed as originally intended. But despite this and the 1800s infrastructure and legacy signaling systems hampering Metroliner operation, the service proved incredibly popular amongst American commuters. By 1971, Half of Metroliner passengers had switched to it from other methods, with many being on business trips. The 7 operating trains had 90% on-time performance, and Capital Beltway Station was open to serve all Metroliners. But problems with the sets persisted behind the scenes. As more Westinghouse-powered sets completed testing, Penn Central refused to accept them due to overheating during frequent stops and worse acceleration than the older Silverliners. They would eventually enter service between Washington, D.C. and New York City regardless. However, by mid-1970, Metroliner out-of-service rates had hit 40%, and their top speed was reduced to 100 miles per hour, not much faster than a conventional passenger train. A change for the Metroliners was required and came in the form of Amtrak, the new national passenger railroad operator created on May 1, 1971. Amtrak took over Penn Central's Metroliner cars and increased service to 12 trains in November. The railroad considered converting Metroliner service into a conventional locomotive and coach service, but the Metroliners were Amtrak's only relatively new piece of equipment at the time, so they decided against it. Amtrak was pleased with the Metroliner car design and heavily based their soon-to-be massive fleet of Amfleet coaches upon it in 1973. Meanwhile, Amtrak had started rebuilding Metroliner sets with new paint and improved reliability, and thus increased marketing for the Metroliners. They were touted as America's fastest train and said to be much more convenient than the northeastern US's congested highways. Several Metroliner sets had accumulated over 11 million miles in revenue service and were in need of repairs. A noticeable change was the dynamic braking resistors and air intakes being relocated to the roof with a streamlined hump. This reduced overheating and snow ingestion issues that were prevalent when it was mounted under the car body. Amtrak's rebuilt cars had a maximum speed of 130 miles per hour, but still only ran at 100 miles per hour. By the end of 1975, the sets had a lower out-of-service rate of 27.5%, but many trains ran with fewer cars than demand called for. In February 1976, Amtrak reduced Metroliner service from 15 to 13 round trips due to the lack of available cars during rebuilds. But as Amtrak was continuing to rebuild the Metroliners, replacements were already on the horizon. In 1976, Amtrak sought to replace their aging 1930s built GG1s and unreliable E60 electric locomotives on conventional services. One of the test subjects brought over from Europe, the Swedish RC4, was able to match a Metroliner's timetable with Amfleet coaches. Despite this, Amtrak considered ordering 118 new Metroliner 2s, but ultimately scrapped this idea as on-time performance with them dropped from 81 to 46%. Conventional locomotives with Amfleets were proving to have a better on-time rate of performance. Amtrak soon initiated a $24.4 million fleet renewal program in 1977, with Metroliner sets being shipped off to GE for refurbishment. 8 GG1s were re-geared for 110 mile/hour operation with Amfleets as a replacement for the Metroliner service. Rebuilt Metroliners entered service in May 1979, with 37 being completed by November. The remaining 24 rebuilds were canceled though. In 1980, the new EMD AEM-7 entered revenue service and could reach speeds of 125 miles per hour with Amfleets, easily outdoing the current Metroliner EMUs. AEM-7s were placed on the Metroliner service as it increased from 12 to 14 trains by October. In late 1980, additional equipment was needed on the electrified portion of the Keystone corridor between Philadelphia and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. In 1978, Amtrak had leased out New Jersey Transit Silverliners and Arrows to run the Keystone corridor as New Jersey Transit awaited their own electrification project to be completed. Amtrak's GG1s and E60s were unreliable, and the railroad was desperate for electric power on the line. After returning the equipment to NJT throughout 1980, the only available Amtrak power was the Metroliners. Test runs of the set on the corridor began in January 1981, with revenue service beginning in February, despite tests a decade prior proving that the cars were not suitable for the service with low acceleration and overheating during stop-and-go operations. The Metroliner EMUs on the Keystone service would be rebranded as Capital Liners. The last run of Metroliner EMUs as a whole on the Metroliner service ran on October 23, 1981. Metroliner service had now finally been taken over by AEM-7s with Amfleets. But by the mid to late 1980s, the Keystone Corridor Metroliner sets had become so unreliable that AEM-7s often towed the sets with their pantographs still raised to supply lighting and heating. By February 1988, Keystone service trains were converted to diesel power and made the Metroliner EMU sets practically obsolete, apart from being used as standard coaches for a little bit. Despite the sets no longer being the poster boy of the Northeast Corridor, that being taken over by the AEM-7, the Metroliners would find an extended service life. After being stored at Amtrak's Wilmington and Bear, Delaware shop complexes, Amtrak found themselves with a surplus of what were essentially Amfleet coaches. Thus, in 1988, 29 Metroliners were stripped of their propulsion systems, repainted, and converted into cab cars for push-pull operation. These were used on corridor service trains on the West and East Coast and Chicago-based trains. Other cars were converted for testing and private use by Amtrak. Penn Central Snack Bar car number 860 would be sent to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, and any others would be scrapped. As for the Metroliner service itself, it would be discontinued after being displaced by the 150-mile-per-hour Acela Express service by 2006. Regardless, the former Metroliner cab cars continue to serve Amtrak on the Keystone service, Valley Flyer, and Hartford line, painted in modern colors with K5LA air horns even after around 50 years of revenue service. However, this isn't to last. In July 2021, Amtrak announced a plan with Siemens to replace their entire fleet of Amfleets and former Metroliner cab cars with Siemens ventured trainsets, consisting of a locomotive, coaches, and some with a cab car. These are set for delivery in 2024, with revenue service to begin in the mid-2020s into the early 2030s. While the Metroliners no longer parade the Northeast Corridor as their own EMU set as the poster boy for the Northeast Corridor, they paved the way for high-speed trains in the US, as one of America's first high-speed trains, despite their many issues and speed restrictions. Even after being retired from their original service, they continue on in push-pull operation on fast corridor trains. Despite the idea of replacement looming in the future, the Metroliners have definitely left their mark, and still continue to leave their mark, on the history book of Amtrak, the National Railroad Passenger Corporation. Thanks for watching this remade edition of Engines of Amtrak. Like I said earlier, you can still go watch the original episode as of the making of this one. Not really sure why you'd want to go watch it again because it kinda sucks in my opinion, but so be it. But either way, thanks to those who sent in pictures and videos of the cab cars to be used in this episode as well. Stay tuned for next time where I'll rediscuss the EMD AEM7. Thank you again for watching.